Well, Dr. Stan back here at Radio Liberty, coming to from the hills overlooking beautiful and picturesque Monterey Bay and bringing you the news behind the news, the story behind the story. Hoping to convince you that reality is usually scoffed at and that illusion is usually king. But in the battle for survival of Western civilization, it's going to be reality, not illusion or delusion that's going to determine what the future will bring. And I wanted to give an example of the illusion. Now, if you listen to our program on Monday, we pointed out, of course, that silver and gold had gone up dramatically, and that actually in the futures contracts, gold was over $1,900 an ounce. We also pointed out that the price would, in all probability, drop this week because the options contracts are going to close on Thursday, which, of course, was today. And, of course, the people who really run things would lose a lot of money if the price of gold was that high. So we anticipated they would knock down the price of gold. The price of gold at opening this morning was $1,722 an ounce. That knocked it down almost $200. Why would they do that? Why, of course, so that the people who bought options would lose big, and the people who were holding the contracts on the other side would make a great deal of money, and that's exactly what happened before the day was over. Gold was back up to $1,770 an ounce. Of course, they're telling you, oh, people were just profit-taking, and don't you believe that for 1 minute? This is all part of the manipulation, which is part of the commodities and options of the stock market. And, ladies and gentlemen, it's all manipulated and very little real. Profit and loss, it has to do, at least in a significant part, with the people who are manipulating things behind the scene. Certainly the President's Group on Financial Matters, the plunge protection team, and believe me, when they want something to plunge, it really plunges. Well, with that as a background, let's talk about other things. Let's go to our special guest today, Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief. And what are we going to be talking about today, Joel?
Well, we're going to talk about Libya first off, but comment on the subject you just brought up. As they did when they took down the silver market 3 or 4 weeks ago, where they changed the margin requirements, which, a lot of the speculators work on margins in order to maximize their profits, especially when things are running up. And all you have to do is pull those margin requirements and change it and make it retroactive, and all of a sudden people have to dump their holdings. And that's exactly what they did on the gold market. Had the same predictable result. And it won't last long. Silver's coming back up, and gold will continue to rebound because the fundamentals are for the dollar weakening and for gold to continue to. But they were able to, help out their friends who held these gold option contracts so that they didn't lose much money. Well, turning to Libya, Colonel Muammar Gaddafi has become the third Arab leader to be ousted by foreign intervention this year. Next on the block, I believe, are Syria, Yemen, and Algeria. However, the destruction of Libya by the West has been a very messy operation, as the U.S. sought to hide its involvement behind NATO and the UN mandate to intervene on behalf of humanity. Well, the war was built upon false justifications, especially that humanitarian justification, built on deceptive warfare through third parties, a host of civilian casualties, and false reporting included. The humanitarian cost of this NATO invasion far outweighs the humanitarian justifications used to start this war, and the rationale for the overthrow of strongman Muammar Gaddafi, based upon minor human rights violations, begs for an explanation of why the U.S. didn't invade Zimbabwe or North Korea, for example.
Well, of course, it's all, you have to get the American people to believe that it's compassion. We're there because we want to prevent civilian casualties. That's why our bombing killed all those civilian casualties. And oh, shucks, we had no idea when you drop bombs on civilian communities, you're going to kill people. But, of course, we got rid of the wicked Gaddafi. Now everything's going to be fine. At least that's what they're going to tell us. And then we're going to find things are going to go from bad to far worse. We'll be back in just a moment here with Joel Skousen here at Radio Liberty. Well, this is Dr. Stan. Our guest this afternoon, Joel Skousen from World Affairs Briefing. He's talking about, certainly, with the tragedy of Libya. And, of course, we were told, well, we had to bomb Libya. Well, it was really NATO that was doing it. We don't mention that we pay 3/4 the expenses of NATO. We provide the bombs. We provide the funding. We provide everything that goes into NATO. NATO is simply a front for its world army, but largely financed by the United States. So certainly our front organization was over there killing people, and of course who's funding the rebels, who's behind this whole thing. Oh, we're told it's all about democracy. We want to change the structure of society, and certainly Gaddafi wasn't perfect, and of course he wasn't perfect. He was a dictator. But we've kept him in power for 30 years. He would not have ever been in power if he had not been initially picked by the CIA and put into power some 30 or 40 years ago. I've forgotten how long. But basically now, of course, we've overthrown Gaddafi, and we're told, well, we're not certain what's going to replace him. Well, why would you want to replace a stable society with what you don't know what's going to replace him? Joel, you picked the story up.
Well, the major... It's not up to decide, whether to replace somebody. And we're certainly picking and choosing. North Korea and Zimbabwe are two of the most tyrannical and evil regimes in the world, and we've made a move to destabilize those. In fact, we've guaranteed their safety. China, of course, and Russia are also, great pariah states that have been predators for many, many years and will continue to do so. We don't touch them. Of course, they're too big to handle. But, as to the specifics, it's hard to know what the real state of affairs are in Tripoli at any given time, as the news reporting has been very inaccurate and biased, especially the mainstream Western press. One of the reasons is that the truly independent press are being threatened and killed as they attempt to present the truth. Reuters has been particularly bad in what NATO audiences are supposed to hear, largely exaggeration of what's really going on the ground. Following, for example, is typical of the image presented that the fight is all but over as rebels rushed into Tripoli a few days ago. Reuters said, jubilant bullfighters swept into the heart of Tripoli as Muammar Gaddafi's forces collapsed and crowds took to the streets to celebrate what they saw as the rapidly approaching end of his 4 decades of power. 2 of Gaddafi's sons were captured by the rebels. They said that the whereabouts of Gaddafi himself were unknown. Well, the latter turned out to be completely true, and the fall of Tripoli was also very premature. The time as if they're just all walking around celebrating in the streets as if everybody has given up the fight, and that's not true. They're fighting to this very day, 2 days later from that. The open fighting...
Hold that thought. Hold that thought. We'll be right back here. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Joel is simply pointing out that most of what we're getting from the controlled media is designed to confuse us. Certainly, I read one article today that said the rebels fighting in Libya were financed by Turkey. Then the next article said that the rebels fighting in Turkey were financed by Qatar. And of course, I suspect that a lot of the funding for all of this has come from the Bank of England and the CIA. But you're never going to see that because you don't want the American people to realize that our government, working in concert with the British, are responsible for funding this world revolutionary movement and toppling nation after nation in the Near East and the Middle East as we bring the radical Muslim Brotherhood to power. But you go right ahead, Joel.
Well, of course, Qatar and the United Arab Emirates and most of these countries in the Middle East are just parts of the Western globalists who are able to get them to money to the rebel cause and then reimburse them, through the back pocket. But what's really aggravating is that the press has used this philosophy of create the image that is all over, so to discourage anyone from resisting any further. And it's got to be, false on this case. The open fighting, as I said, will be ongoing for a few more days. Thousands of pro-Gaddafi supporters have been armed. They distributed millions of rifles and ammunition to everybody. And there will be counter-warfare going on for some time in the future as the unpopularity of the rebel regime fully dawns on the people of Libya. There's little control or organization among the bands of rebel fighters pressing in through the city. It's going to take months to sort out who belongs to what faction and who should disarm and who should be allowed to carry arms. Meanwhile, how do you disarm all of this public when you don't know who's wearing uniforms. NATO's going to have a tough time putting Humpty Dumpty back together again now that Gaddafi's been pushed off the wall. And I'm certainly no champion of Gaddafi, but it's very irritating to myself and other people in the world to see the United States pick and choosing winners around the world without any end game other than global cooperation. I think we're going to see, for IS state, there will be in constant conflict now here and in the future. The U.S. will be directly responsible for starting all of this. The UK Examiner reported, according to human rights organizations, the U.S. allegedly ordered targeted killings of Voltaire Network reporters Mahdi Daria Nezamroya and Thierry Maison. Now, Thierry Maison was deeply into the 9/11 conspiracy about, no airplane in the Pentagon. He surfaced back in the news as someone, who they've attempted to kill going to Libya and trying to report on the truth of this. And literally, there's dozens of stories about how the media has just been, media itself has been threatening other members of the media to tell, the Western version of events, threaten them with their life. Non-mainstream reporters in Libya covering the NATO war while other independent reporters are being fired upon. Mohammed Nabouz was killed Sunday, according to ABC News. In an interview with journalist Zanzibar, he reported most of the street news, but Libya has been untrue, as alternative news sites heavily report are increasingly persecuted. From the leftist press TV, they fake video footages, sons of Gaddafi in rebel hands, rebels controlled Tripoli, are all lies out of Libya as the situation in Tripoli becomes more chaotic. Renowned writer and columnist Stephen Lenman says, Lenman's a leftist, but sometimes I'll use leftist sources when they're fighting to get out the truth from a government cover-up. So this is incredible that, they have just really falsified even some of the video footage taken from other areas and made it appear as if this jubilant crowd is taken in a certain city. I mean, this is just worse than yellow journalism. This is downright falsification. So Press TV asked Stephen Lenman, how do you assess the situation in Tripoli? He says, I know conditions on the streets are very fast-moving, very fluid, very chaotic, very violent. I also know that anything by the major media, especially the American major media, some of it's so shocking it's shameless and it's deliberately falsified. It even gives propaganda a bad name, he said. The U.S. war on Libya is absolutely illegal, with no humanitarian concern for the Libyan people. Even the so-called rebels are not rebels, they're mercenaries. They've been hired. Most of them may not even know they're doing, but they're paid, and they're brought in mostly from the outside. They're probably being paid more than they ever got before, so you need a job and get a paycheck, and you're told, quote, want to liberate this country from bad people. They go in and do what they're told because they want to get that paycheck. The so-called celebrations in the street of Tripoli, he says, I skip them. Of course, eventually, my comment is they come true, but initially the media tries to portray an early victory to induce others to give up. Earlier, when Western media reported rebel mass celebration in the streets of cities like Zawiya and Misrata and others that were supposedly liberated by rebels, they never were liberated by rebels. Those lies. Gaddafi took cover, or Gaddafi's forces took cover while NATO was bombing. Rebel elements moved in, fake footage of their celebrating in the streets was shown to celebratory crowds in the West as fireworks going off. The lies. As soon as the bombing stopped, Gaddafi's forces moved back in and the rebels scattered, afraid. So each of these smaller towns like Misrata, Brega, and Iwawa are still in government hands, and who knows what's going on in Tripoli. Just days ago, there were supposed mass rebel celebrations for victories in Misrata, but while there were massive crowds in Tripoli 2 days ago celebrating government all over the rebels, the vast majority of people in Tripoli especially detest the rebels. All the major in Libya detest the rebels and detest NATO. So there can't be any peace, Dan, when you have this much anti-rebel feeling among the people, and it's not being shown on Western media.
Well, it's such a tragedy, and I mean, basically there's no way that men with rifles can fight sophisticated aircraft, with bombs and certainly all sorts of means of mass killing, and this is really what it's all about. I mean, we don't thousands of sorties over there. They say, oh, well, it's not America. Why? Because it's NATO that's doing it. Well, NATO is simply an extension of the United States, but they don't tell the American people that. These pilots are doing exactly what they're told to do, and America, in my estimation, is directing this whole thing, going right along with the British, because we always work in concert together. That is all part of certainly destabilizing this whole region of the world. I mean, this is not an isolated incident. We've already overthrown Egypt. We've already overthrown Tunisia. We've already replaced the government there in Turkey with a pro-Muslim government, with secular. Previously, this was some years ago, certainly there's a revolution going on in Syria. They've overthrown the moderate government in Lebanon. This whole part of the world is is being progressively destabilized, and it's being destabilized for a purpose. And the only organized organization over there that can take power is the Muslim Brotherhood. It's not simply by coincidence that Hillary Clinton's deputy advisor is a Muslim woman whose mother is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, whose brother is a part of the jihadist movement. How could a woman with that sort of a background get a clearance to work for the American State Department and be the advisor to the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton? Go right ahead, Joe.
Well, it's not because Hillary Clinton is a Muslim any more than Alger Hiss was a communist. These are globalists who work with Muslims in order to create conflict. So that's the real danger. But, you know, journalists have really been targeted in Tripoli. Mahdi Nezamroya, who I met previously, was in Tripoli at one of the major hotels and said that NATO landed insurgents in Tripoli harbor. I don't think anywhere in the talked about NATO craft landing insurgents in the harbor. That means that they were using NATO ships to land, you know, in direct troop movements. They are attacking my hotel, he said. I almost got shot. They're still lying a lot about claims of controlling the capital. That was spoken as of Thursday. In Mahdi's email, he said, Stephen Lindman, that CNN, not directly to him, but through another person, CNN threatened him and said that he personally would pay for opposing the war. Now, if you can imagine, broadcaster threatening an independent journalist for reporting the truth about events on the ground, not the propaganda CNN and the New York Times and other major media are reporting. He further goes on, this is Stephen Lindman saying, NATO knows who they are, that is the independent journalists, and they are targeted. There are snipers on rooftops. Who knows who is friend and who is foe? Franklin was shot in the leg by a sniper. That's a journalist. He said the rebels are armed gangs and mercenaries who are indistinguishable from Tripoli with it. They're waging street warfare. Well, of course, that goes both ways. The Gaddafi forces, having given out almost 1 million arms to civilians, are also waging street warfare. And you can imagine how difficult this is with people with no uniform shooting at one another, trying to determine who's on our side and who is on the government side. A lot of civilian casualties because of the bombing. Tripoli hospitals are loaded with casualties as civilians are caught in the crossfire between combatants in these civilian clothes. This is NATO's war, of course, which is the main NATO partner of Cameron in the UK and Sarkozy in France and Obama of the United States. They're the three main co-conspirators in this war. And, of course, it's not them personally. This is a globalist agenda that they're following. I think people have to realize that none of the presidents actually called the shots.
No, I'm afraid the globalists call the shots, and this is part of a larger a program which is to destabilize this part of the world. And my fear is that when the dust finally settles, the Muslim Brotherhood will be in control over there, and will once again have the best enemy money could buy. Why would anybody want to push to concentrate power with the radical Muslim Brotherhood? Well, of course, as the book we carry called The Devil's Game points out so well, why, of course, the MI6 started funding the Muslim Brotherhood, this radical movement back in 1928. CIA has been involved since after the Second World War. But you always want to create an enemy so you can rally the people behind the government for the coming war. Joel, go ahead, pick up the story.
Well, the only reason that these ragtag group of rebels have been winning is that every time Gaddafi's military forces come out in the open, they get bombed by NATO. And so NATO is very much involved in this as a military aggressive war. It's just a sham that they're in there to protect civilians, as stated earlier, killing thousands of civilians in the bombing and the shelling as they are running air support for the rebel troops. Mataba.net, one of the independent news organizations out of Libya, reports that fighting is now raging around the seaside of Tripoli. Tripoli's on the coast, of course, showing that NATO forces control the entire Gulf of Sidra, which, but do not control the critical central Tripoli areas, which are right at the seafront. Journalists who are supposed to be evacuated today by the Red Cross Sea or via sea to having been kept prisoner by Gaddafi forces last week at the Rixos Hotel, apparently could not leave and are again holed up in a hotel, this time on the sea at the Corinthia. Now that shows that obviously if they haven't been able to evacuate those journalists they so-called rescued from the Rixos Hotel, rebels are not in control of the situation yet. I have no doubt, Stan, that NATO is going to win this, but I think there's the possibility that it's going to be a long-term guerrilla war, just because everyone's going to hate this government that has imposed upon them. It will not do justice by the people any more than Muammar Gaddafi has, and so you'll simply be trading one group of rebels for another. So now that the Battle of Libya is the final stage, it's time to assess who is doing what. The rebels, as I said, are a ragtag conglomeration of anti-Gaddafi tribal factions, combined with former combatants that were sent in by Western intelligence agencies to fight against the Western coalition in Iraq. The Iraqi war veterans, they were fighting against the U.S. and NATO there, and now they're fighting for them. I think that's only because they're being bribed with hundreds of thousands of dollars, just like the U.S. bribed the Iraqi opposition to stop fighting. Alone, these undisciplined forces don't have a chance against Gaddafi's armed forces. The key to the prosecution of this illegal war has been the use of American and NATO fighter bombers and armed drones. They've waged a relentless and largely secret bombing campaign on Gaddafi's military bases and troop concentration. U.S. Air Force and Navy aircraft were also participating in ground attacks long after Obama said there were no further U.S. combat role. The jets have been pounding Gaddafi's forces whenever they massed in opposition. That's the reason Tripoli wasn't blocked off at the perimeter to keep the forces from pouring into the city. Any fixed fortifications were blasted by NATO. Gaddafi was forced to turn to a guerrilla campaign of close fighting within the city, and that's what's happening right now. The media are also partially admitting that foreign special forces were on the ground the entire time. Now that NATO's in reach of overthrowing Gaddafi, the corporate media is rife with reports that Al-Qaeda, lords, disenfranchised former Gaddafi bureaucrats had plenty of help from the U.S., Britain, and NATO in the, quote, Arab Spring operation to install a government amenable to the global. Special forces, according to Kurt Nimo of Infowars.com, from Britain, France, Jordan, and Qatar are on the ground in Libya and have set up operations in Tripoli. British forces, in particular, he says, have assisted rebel units by helping them get better organized to conduct operations. Some of these forces from all the countries have traveled with rebel units from camps across Libya. As they advanced on Tripoli, they provided intelligence.
Hold that thought. We'll be right back. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Chris Joel is simply saying that there are special forces units there in Libya. Now, these are British special forces, French special forces, Qatar, Jordan. You can be sure that we're helping to support all of them. American planes have been pounding this area, although it may be the majority of the airstrikes have been coming from the other NATO allies. But remember, we pay for most of the cost of NATO, and he who pays the piper calls the tune. But there are special forces. This is not necessarily, rebels, a popular uprising. These rebels are being paid. They're being well paid. Most of them are not from Libya. They're from outside, professional mercenaries, professional killers, hired as part of this program by certainly the globalists to overthrow the Libyan government as we destabilize this whole area of the world. Go right ahead, Joe.
Well, that's certainly true. A Libyan official who requested not to be identified said that U.S. and British military crews were sent in on February 23rd and 24th, the night before American and British warships and small naval boats off Libyan coast, attacked. Following the arrival of foreign troops, Al Jazeera reported that in an unnamed rebel source related how he had on training in military techniques at a secret facility in eastern Libya. In June, despite visits by British Prime Minister David Cameron, ex-SAS troops photographed with rebels in Libya, blending in with the insurgents in sand-colored clothes, peaked caps, shades, and linen scarves. They were the UK's unofficial boots on the ground. Of course, everyone's saying there are no boots on the ground, but they're lying.
And basically, they're dressing them up as Arabs there, but these are Special Forces troops, and their pictures on Infowar.com of these British Special Forces troops dressed up in Arab regalia. Go right ahead.
An editorial in the Boston Sun expressed the growing frustration of Americans who are fed up with this continual stream of foreign intervention. How appropriate the front page photo shows a joyous Libyan rebel in American battle dress uniform. I'm glad he's so happy. As a taxpayer, I'm sickened to realize, again, our dollars, 900 billion of them, have been squandered on yet another unnecessary war. So I guess we can now look forward to the executions of Muammar Gaddafi, the Baltimore Sun, his son and other family members. Where does our Constitution mandate America must police the world? Well, NATO will claim honors for the Libyan rebel victory. Everyone knows it was the United States that did heavy lifting. And while I'm speaking of expenses, who's going to pay for the cleanup of that country, care for the maimed and the wounded, and the resettlement of the refugees, and the repair of police infrastructure? Naturally, it will be us, the American taxpayer, unquote. In summary, Gaddafi will lose this battle soon, but that doesn't mean that there will be peace in Libya. There are so many warring factions in the country that Western globalists will have their hands full trying to produce a reliable puppet government and engender more extreme discontent. The only way that Western powers will control the resources of Libya is by direct military occupation, at least of the oil production and shipping facilities. All of this is continuing to build the reputation that the U.S. and now NATO are the bullies of the world. Now, Gaddafi also has huge stockpiles of weapons and munitions, some of which may be classified as weapons of mass destruction, as he does have chemical weapons. It is unlikely that the West will allow the rebels to have control of these, nor 144 tons of gold bullion Libya has secret away somewhere. I'm betting that the will end up confiscated by the Western powers as payment for the war if they bother to announce that they've captured it. It will be hard to capture Gaddafi himself, however. His compound is laced with underground tunnels leading off in all directions, including the airport and the port. He may well have left the country.
Well, I think that we've already stolen their money. They have money deposited in banks in the United States. We just stole it. I mean, that's the only way to say it. And then we're using part of it to finance the rebels. Libya's own money that was deposited in American banks. Think of that next time you put your money in the bank here. They can take it any time they want to. And of course, that gold will, of course, help to replenish the gold supplies here. I think one of the big problems with poor Gaddafi is he wanted to establish a gold dinar. He didn't want to go along with this North African Union that we wanted him to go along with. And of course, when you fight the establishment, when you fight the globalists, they will simply destroy you. Would you agree, Joel?
Yes, that is the problem. And if you play along, no matter just how hideous your regime, like North Korea or Zimbabwe, they let you alone. Of course, part of that, my theory is that letting North Korea continue to have a past is that they're preserving that for a trigger event, World War III, being an ally of China. That could very well trigger a nuclear war.
Well, I think that we're in real trouble, ladies and gentlemen, because the average American is not hearing the sort of things that Joel's is saying. They're reading the New York Times. The purpose of the New York Times is to confuse you, to give you all sorts of conflicting information, but never tell you about the globalist or agenda. For one world order, one world religion, one world leader. We'll be back in just a moment with Joel Skousen. Joe, you go right ahead.
Well, let's talk about backdoor amnesty for illegals in America. While this story was falsely hyped around the web as something Obama did by an executive order, that is, the defeated DREAM Act by edict, the truth is almost as bad. Lynn Stetter had a summary of this in her latest posting on newsreviews.com, and she said there's been an email blast make rounds of the internet claiming that Obama has implemented the DREAM Act by executive order. It's true is that John Morton of ICE, that's Immigration Customs Enforcement, issued a memo dated June 17th on prosecutorial discretion. He said, I have suspected from the onset Obama had a hand, she wrote, in the writing of this memo. That suspicion was confirmed now. I don't believe that Obama had any hand in writing the memo, other than when advisors told him that this is the way to get around the rejection of the DREAM Act. That suspicion was confirmed yesterday when I was directed by an email from an activist to a White House blog. Issued 2 months ago and one day after the John Morton memo, the White House blog entry at the above link states the following. Under the President's direction, for the first time ever, the Department of Homeland Security has prioritized the removal of people convicted of crimes in the United States. Now, prioritize the removal is worded to make it look like they are obeying the intent of the law while actually refusing to remove certain illegals. None of the goal of this prioritizing isn't to remove anybody, but to justify allowing those to stay unless they're actually guilty of a heinous crime. This memo effectively tells illegal aliens that they are home free, according to the National Council, La Raza. That's a radical pro-immigration Latino group of which you're very familiar with in California. Instead, DHS has created a process that includes an interagency team of senior leaders at the Justice Department who will review the current deportation caseloads and identify low priority and non-criminal cases that should be considered for an exercise of discretion. Cases will be closed, and those individuals will be able to apply for work authorization. I mean, they're given a front door entry at the top of the line.
Hold that thought, Joel. Hold the thought there. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and Joel is simply talking about what we've seen recently, an executive order of some sort, and whether it was really an executive order came from the Department of Homeland Security, but basically it said that if somebody is in this country illegally, they've violated our laws, but they haven't done any other crimes, that they're going to be allowed, or most of them are going to be allowed, just to remain here, or even got to be able to get work permits. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a real problem with unemployment in America. We probably have about 11, 12 million illegal immigrants here. Well, so when we are having all these Americans, or probably 20, 30 million Americans, underemployed or not employed, or can't get jobs, or given up looking for work, they're going to, of course, allow all these illegal immigrants to be here and have a work permit and take the jobs away from Americans. And this is, of course, exactly what's going on, because everybody wants to blame it on Obama. But remember, Obama is simply a figurehead for the people who really run things behind the scenes. He's the guy who gets all the flack. He's the guy we criticize. But President Obama is simply does what he is told to do. If he didn't, I think they'd probably send him on a trip to Dallas. Before we go on, Joel, I'd like you to tell our listeners how they can get in touch with the World Affairs Brief, how they can subscribe to the World Affairs Brief, and tell them about the 3 books that you've written, which are among the best sellers that we have here at Radio Liberty. Go ahead.
Well, thanks, Dan. The World Affairs Brief is showcased on my website, worldaffairsbrief.com, and people can get a free sample issue by emailing me at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com. Also on my website, not only worldaffairsbrief.com, but joelskousen.com. Find pictures and explanations of each of my books. Bestseller is Strategic Relocation, North American Guide to Places. Everything that you need to know about developing contingency plans for relocation, analysis of safe places around the world, as well as in the United States. There aren't that many around the world, actually. But it's an all-new color edition, color maps, and with almost 3/4 new analysis. My biggest book is The Secure Home. It's almost 700 pages, and it covers everything from high security construction and remodeling to how to do self-sufficiency designed equipment within a home. And my last book is How to Implement a High Security Shelter in a Home, and it's all about building a safe room in an existing basement. And all three of these books are available from Radio Liberty.
By calling 1-800-544-8927, 1-800-544-8927, and they among our best-selling books, especially now as people look around and they realize we're living in a very unstable situation. Certainly, our government is financing revolutions throughout the world. There's serious talk about the stability of our economy, of rising unemployment here at home. We're seeing examples of violence, the flash attacks in a number of our cities. We're seeing, of course, demonstrations, certainly in some of our cities, certainly in San Francisco, efforts to close down the BART system there, and of course the police in confrontation with the demonstrators. People are looking at least for some security in their homes, and this is why they're getting the material that Joel is offering. Go right ahead, Joel.
Well, that's part of my philosophy, Stan, of a fight for our liberty and strive to inform other people. We still need to prepare for it. We need to prepare to lose, even though we don't want to lose. I mean, we've got to fight to live another day, and you can't fight to live another day unless you prepare for those things. Going back to the amnesty issue, in issuing the John Morton memo, ICE and the Obama administration are blatantly stating that they do not intend to enforce existing law, which reads in part, all officers whose duty is to enforce criminal law shall have authority to make arrests for violation of the immigration proposal. So, now talking about not prosecuting after that. In an AP article published in Chicago, an Obama regime, and Lynn Stetter, I'm quoting from, doesn't acknowledge Barack Obama as a lawful or legal president of the United States, and that's true. That's why I rarely refer to him as President Obama, simply as Obama. But an official is quoted as saying that the indefinite stay will not give illegal immigrants a path to permanent legal residency, but they will let them apply for a work permit, and that's as good as, giving them a, permanency. In the blog entry, Obama acknowledges that 10 million aliens are in this country and claims that by directing resources to prosecute more serious crimes, more immigration enforcement puts pressure where it counts most and less for prison. Well, obviously, they're only interested in giving less pressure, and this is the excuse to do it.
And basically, of course, they're encouraging illegal immigration. This is why they have refused to build the fence that they were instructed to by Congress in 2006. But the people who run the country don't take their orders from Congress. I mean, Congress is simply there to give you the impression that your elected representatives will have some influence. Congress votes to build a fence. They absolutely refuse to build the fence. And certainly Congress says we should have enforcement of immigration laws. They don't enforce the immigration laws because they want the illegal immigration. They want a multicultural, multilingual society. They want to destroy the America that we grew up in and replace it with a globalist America. Go right ahead.
Well, as with mainstream media sources, Obama flagrantly understates the illegal alien population at 10 million. Over 3 years, the population was estimated at 38 million, and today the number is close to 45 million as illegal aliens pour across our southern border with no fear of being caught. Obama's trying to use the economy to undermine rule of law and allow illegal immigrants to stay in this country. While his reasoning may seem logical, but the result will be a further undercutting of our already bigger economy and a further undermining of our country and our constitutional rule of law.
And I had somebody on from the Center for Immigration Studies the other day. I asked him, how much is this costing? America to have all these illegal immigrants in the country. And he was using a figure over $100 billion a year. I don't know if it's accurate, but by the time you get the medical care and certainly the health care and certainly the education and the welfare benefits that many of them get, I mean, this was almost 10% of our budget. But go right ahead.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. just an incredible thing. And most of that has been blamed, I think, on the courts, wherever people have attempted to stop this outflow of welfare and hospital and medical education benefits to illegal aliens. The courts have overturned it. And we've really got a strong liberal bent, and more just liberal. These are government people who really get the phone call of the night and turn their attention to what the government wants. And nothing is more symptomatic than that one judge in California who swore that he finally going to give the Obama citizenship a fair hearing, and he was not going to sweep it under the rug. And then 2 months later, he just took the case without reason, and he got a phone call of me. That's all that happened.
I'm sure that does happen. And ladies and gentlemen, when they threaten your family, why you give in? I know, because we've had threats against our family through the years, not recently, but originally when I got started in this, we used to get threats all the time, about, how many children you have, and what if you're a judge that you get calls like that? Why, you usually will go along with the agenda. It's easier to go along than to try to fight them and to stand up. And we've got an awful lot of judges, an awful lot of people in government who would rather switch than fight.
Well, in another story, there's the major scandal in the SEC where one of their attorneys turned whistleblowers about the SEC shredding hundreds of thousands of documents to cover up for Wall Street fraud. So this attorney, Darcy Flynn, said that the SEC has been shredding documents for decades, and why is that? It's because essentially cover-up strategy. William K. Black, professor of economics and law and the senior regulator during the S&L crisis, says that the government's strategy now, as during the S&L crisis, is to cover up how bad things are. But at least they sent some people to prison. In S&L, they haven't sent anybody to prison for anything relative to the Bernie Madoff scandal and any of these regulators who actually knew about that and could have stopped it years before. Of course, it's very important to keep the facts from getting to people. Here's some of the example of the potential frauds that have been occurring. The government-sponsored rating agencies committed nasty fraud by collusion with one another to cover up for the debt, the ratings, the falsified ratings of these mortgage-backed instruments. The Treasury Department allowed banks to cook their books. Business Week reported in 2006, President George W. Bush has bestowed on his intelligence czar, John Negroponte, broad authority in the name of national security to excuse publicly traded companies from their usual accounting and security disclosure obligations. And that's a license, to simply say if you're an insider to the government, you don't have to deal with the same rules that anyone else does. Regulators knew of and allowed the use of debt-hiding accounting tricks by big banks. Tim Geithner was complicit in Lehman Brothers account fraud and pushed to pay AIG's CDS, or the securities or the derivatives credit default swaps counterparties at full value and then keep the deal secret. As Robert Wright, the scandal we talked about in the credit default swaps, when AI was bailed out, in fact, they were expecting to take a loss of about 80% on those. And came in and, talked Congress into bailing them out of 100% of value. And it was just an incredible giveaway. As Robert Reich knows, Geithner was very much in the center of the action regarding the secret bailout of Bear Stearns without congressional approval. And William Black points out that Mr. Geithner, as president of the Federal Reserve Bank in New York, was one of the senior regulators who failed to take any effective regulatory action to prevent the crisis, but instead put up its debt. And of course, this whistleblower, Mr. Darcy of the SEC, says Bernie and Polson broke the law and should be prosecuted. Freddie and Fannie also helped to create the epidemic of mortgage frauds, and now the government is talking about reinstating them as an important link towards redeveloping the housing market. I mean, these things just won't go away, Stan.
I agree with him.
These things, they just keep repackaging this stuff and forgiving people and then creating a crisis. It was incredible to me how you had the news today of Warren Buffett buying $5 billion worth of stock in Bank of America to try to, keep it from default and to boost public confidence, and the market still went a couple of hundred points. Warren Buffett is proving to be just a plain government shill. He's marketing the government point of view. So it's no wonder that he was having a special conference for the higher-ups in the World Trade Center when the 9/11 attack occurred. I don't think that was coincidental.
No, I fear you're right. But of course, we have the public Warren Buffett. We have the private Warren Buffett that most people have never heard much about. Go ahead.
Well, of course, this is part of the insider of immunity that I've long talked about. It's one of the things, the oil that releases the conspiracy without having to reveal the full nature of the conspiracy to other people. You give them immunity, and you talk people into joining the insider club because they need immunity. So the government is, of course, complicit in this great financial crime. There's no way out of it. They've created too much money to pay anything back. These people are all at the top positions in all of the financial, regulatory, and too big sales. People like Greenspan, Polson, Monteith, Bernanke, Geithner, Rubin, Summers, all the big boys. In criminal jargon, they created intensely criminogenic environment. I have no knowledge of whether the national security aspects played any role, but the anti-regulatory dogma was devastated, said William Black. So I'll happen to do that. I do have knowledge that national security aspects do play a role because that's how they keep people silent who are privy to the fact that there's an illegal act going on. No, this is a matter of national security, and you have to be quiet about it.
I agree. Go ahead.
Okay, let's see. Turning to other stories here. Well, one of the problems in the military is finding out not only is there a great wave of rape that's hitting women who go into the military quite actually, I might add, but there's a lot of male rape occurring as well, and this is very much being covered up by the military services, especially now that they're trying to integrate gays into the military. And I've always presented this to the American people as it is a, just consensual thing between consenting adults, and it doesn't engender or do any damage to military morale. But I'll tell you, the fear of male rape, and it has happened, a lot of that is just punishment for people who don't go along. This can be very, very devastating. And it's a problem in the military of much larger proportion than the American people are being allowed to understand.
And of course, down the line, this is going to have a profound impact upon the morale of our people. This is, of course, why our founders wanted morality to be a key instrument in our military. When you give a person a gun and he has the right to kill people, you want to have moral people who will not abuse their power. Unfortunately, why the things that are going on are demoralizing our military.
Well, and it's pretty difficult to get normal people, and most people in the military are normal, to do things that are legal and kill civilians, and that's why you have to concentrate so much on not challenging any orders. And when people, as an aircraft bomber pilot in the Vietnam era, they said very strongly, in fact, you never really knew who was down there. You have a target, you have an aerial photo of what the target is supposed to be, and you're supposed to bomb it, and you recognize that. And very rarely do you get close enough to see civilians scurrying from the house before it's too late. And but when it has happened, good military pilots have had a fit of conscience, as in Bosnia, when one of these Air Force pilots was told to attack a convoy, a military convoy, because this is just civilians and tractors out there, and he refused to bomb. And he was told to bomb it anyway, even though he had objections. And unfortunately for the U.S., the Russians were monitoring that AWACS frequently and got that all on tape and leaked it to the press. But otherwise, the U.S. government would have covered that up and would have prosecuted that Air Force pilot who had, a good conscience. This is just despicable that our government does things like this. Well, in other stories, we're looking at the EPA and requirement now going to shut down a good percentage of the coal utility plants because of this carbon emission footprint. It's going to end up being a tremendous hike in utility prices. Almost 50% of our energy still comes from coal in the United States.
And of course, this is going to create rolling blackouts, not only in Texas where they're going to begin this, but I think probably in many places across America. People say, well, how could this thing be happening? Without understanding, we're tearing out our dams, we don't have hydroelectric power, we're closing down the coal generating plants. We're going to see more and more shortage of electricity in America. I share your concern, Joel. And the average American doesn't understand this is all part of the program, to lower our living standards. Our guest is Joel Skousen here, and we'll be back in a moment to wrap up today's program here at Radio Liberty. Go right ahead, Joel. They're already talking about rolling blackouts in Texas, certainly within the next year or two.
Yes, it's really going to be sad. And, of course, there's no new nuclear plants. The more you have these problems, as the Fukushima plant, and that was a problem not with nuclear so much as a faulty location, trying to get it too close to water or the ocean for cooling, and not taking into consideration, the potential of a tsunami. Well, in other news, it's really going to be continue to squeeze the economy. Is that the Department of Homeland Security is now mandating that there be no work list as well as no fly list. The citizens must get government approved work in certain private sector jobs that have anything to do with transportation or security or manufacture of things that can be considered security. I can see this noose closing in on the American people not being on the approved work list, and of course being a dissident or writing a newsletter like I do or like you do on radio, which is certainly not that we would be interested in work for anyone else at our age, but certainly this is going to impact people around us. But, amazing, Stan, as we look at, I've long predicted this long view of history that we're heading for a large war, and you can see little pieces starting together, whether it's Libya inciting riots, we're going to see now Syria be taken down next, and the U.S. is going to be so hated in the next decade that eventually when Russia and China strike, a lot of people will applaud, unfortunately. U.S. troops are going to now stay in Afghanistan through 2024. That's the secret joke of the military. Paul Krugman, Keynesians, is talking about how we need another war to avoid depression. Oh, it's not going to work this next time. Time they're going to give us inflation, which is what happened during the Great Depression of war. It's going to be very difficult for people to adjust to it. So I think we're looking at stagflation in the future, a long, slow grind downward. But when war comes, they will have that as an excuse to get us not only to a new world order, but to default debt and say we've got to start over with a new world currency.
And of course, that will end up impoverishing the vast majority of the American people who do not understand the basis of our monetary system.
And make them more dependent on government over time.
Amen to that. Well, I guess it's been Joel Skousen from World Affairs Brief. We hope you'll want to get copies of the World Affairs Brief. Joel, thank you so much for being with us, and we'll look forward to talking to you tomorrow morning. And we'll be back here in just a moment with one of our favorite guests, Joel Skousen, right here at Radio Liberty. Well, this is Dr. Stan, and certainly this is the time when I need to remind our listeners out across America that my ministry, Radio Liberty, is still primarily listener-supported. Yes, we have a few advertisers, and if you incidentally know anybody who would like to advertise with us, would appreciate it, or if you'd like to advertise, I would be glad to talk to you, but basically, we are still primarily listener-supported, and if you'd like to get some of our products or you'd like to join the Radio Liberty family of supporters, our telephone number is 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927. And then, of course, we do hope that many of you will get my book, Brotherhood of Darkness, to understand the real esoteric forces that work within our society. We hope you get our talks on the dark secret and the forbidden secret and the syllabuses that go with that. We hope you want to get, of course, the CD set on the dark awakening. In the book now, The Black Awakening, we just got the supply in. You'll want to get this information to understand the spiritual forces at work within our society. We have a great DVD called Operation Monarch, and of course Bob Fletcher has one on mind control, and they're all available by calling our 800 number, 1-800-544-8927. Now, of course, we encourage people to begin making preparations for the difficult times that lie ahead. If you need to get a big Berkey or a Berkey Light, or even lay out a supply of extra filters, we recommend that you do this. People need to begin making preparations because we are going to be entering some very, very difficult times. If you need health products, vitamins, minerals, some of the products we carry like allobiotic, not antibiotic, but allobiotic, and vitamin D3, have a good supply of these things on hand because, of course, if things start getting bad, you're going to have difficulty getting any of the products. And then, of course, if you need products from your doctor, ask him for extras that you can have on hand so that you'll be able to look after yourself and look after your family as we enter into what I believe is coming very soon, and that is a period of chaos and crisis. Why? Because there's no instance of all history when a nation is turned against God, and God has not eventually withdrawn his support from that nation. And believe me, this nation has turned its back on God. When was the last time you heard any of our religious leaders speaking out against these senseless wars and now financing this whole bombing, engaged in killing civilians over there in Libya? And of course, you could tell me we could send our planes over to drop bombs and we're not going to kill civilians, and our planes can be used to land troops. And of course, where's the money really coming to finance all of this? Oh, it's coming from Turkey and Qatar. Ladies and gentlemen, the CIA and the Bank of England are doing this. We doubt that the Bank of England's involved in financing the terrorists in North Africa. Why, you can get a copy of Lord James's testimony before Parliament. Actually, he's just talking to Parliament on the 1st of November. We have it. We have the articles. We have the statement from the House of Lords. Lord James, 1st of November of last year, talking about how he's been working with the Bank of England to finance the terrorists in Ireland and in North Africa. But of course, he doesn't want to talk about North Africa because that's an ongoing process and it's sensitive. It ought to be sensitive. They're financing this whole thing. The Bank of England, the CIA. He doesn't talk about the CIA, just talks about the Bank of England. But you must understand, nothing as it appears to be. Everything is controlled. Your access to information is controlled, which is why we do what we do 5 hours a day, and then we have our weekend programs. And fortunately, you can hear us certainly every day, and then on the weekends here at this station. We do encourage you to get our material. Give us a call at 1-800-544-8927. 1-800-544-8927, or you can remember 1-800-5-HIV-WAR, because we are at war today. And then, of course, we ask you to pray for America, to pray for revival, to pray for our leaders, but please pray for Radio Liberty, our provision and protection.